Okay. Those resignation. Let's just do it.
All right, today is Thursday, April 18th. This is a hybrid finance committee meeting to discuss budget items. So I'm calling this meeting to order. Present, I have myself, Councillor Shoup, and Councillor Cushing. Item number 3, we don't have minutes available. These were, this meeting is a special meeting, I guess, as part of the budget process to continue the work that we started last week. Item number 4 is discussion of FY 25 municipal school budgets. So I know, Tom, you have a couple
Yeah.
things you want to set up, so.
We do. Before we jump into the agenda items, if we could just kind of make a clarification. An astute resident was looking at the budget book and was doing some math and pointed out an error. And in fact, it is an error. And I'd like Norm Pildow just to kind of speak to that very quickly. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I think it's important to acknowledge it and kind of get it on the record. What we'll do is update the proper charts and numbers in the budget book on Monday when Tony gets back. The good news is none of the relevant information changes. All the net numbers that were reported are accurate, and that's what we've really been talking about. But nonetheless, we want to acknowledge an error and correct it.
Tom did most of the heavy lifting on this one. That's correct. In the table that's in the letter of transmittal where we summarize our gross and net, the municipal gross for FY 24 was reported incorrectly, and the table below shows the corrected presentation. So the municipal gross should be the 42,987,850, and then the TIFs and the other rows were also incorrect in the gross column. But everything to the right of that, that's net FY 25 gross and net, and the calculations are all unchanged and correct, and those agree with the tax rate comp sheet in the exhibit in the budget. So
Yeah, and I'll accept responsibility. What happened is I was working from a tax rate comp sheet that I included in the proposed budget last year, as opposed to the final one that had commitment, and there were changes that were made. So it was an oversight, and we'll certainly correct it.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Any questions for Tom or Norm on this?
It happens. Shouldn't happen, but it does.
it does. And thankfully, there's a lot of eyes on it, so let's call it and get the right message.
And again, the saving grace is the net numbers, which is really what we've been focusing on this year more so than past years, were correct. So I feel somewhat vindicated in that respect.
Great.
With respect to organizing your conversation this evening, the first item is potential amendments to the budget. We kept kind of a running scorecard of your discussion points with department heads and the Board of Education or school board. Beyond that, staff's done some additional work. And so really, I did this to organize my own thoughts, and hopefully it makes some sense to you. Liam, if you could share that first sheet. So this is in the packet. This first grouping under the heading recommended adjustments, we've broken them out by school and town. These are things that were discussed either at your meeting last week, or they're new things that staff's identified that recommend that we're comfortable recommending that you make these changes. And let me just go through the different groupings, then we can loop back and talk about any one of these in detail. Liam, if you just tab down, I would note as we go by, that first group totals about $760,000 in total, and that's a combination of both revenue increases and expenditure decreases. The next grouping, and again, this is something we can talk about whether I've hit the mark right and captured the right items. You can tab down, please. These were items that were kind of discussed in passing. I think Chairman Anderson, noted as we went kind of, I wonder if we could find alternative funding sources. The majority of these things, in fact, all of them are CIP items. And I've tried to match up based on my cursory review, what alternative sources might be for each of these. And we can spend some time talking about that. I would note there's a new one added at the bottom. This is one that was not in the book, not discussed, but something that's come to our attention since then. With a number of the power outages at Public Safety Building, we've noticed that our uninterrupted power supply for the dispatch center in particular is not sufficient, and IT is recommending that we bolster that system. And so there's an extra $70,000 project we'd like to discuss with you. We can certainly have Jen Day come in and speak to you in more detail, but I want to make sure we capture the thought. Moving through this list, the next grouping I've characterized as CIP items that we either want to add. I think Councilor Shoup mentioned the stormwater utility feasibility study. There's two others that I noted potentially may be deferred, so I've just kind of captured those for further conversation consideration. And then we move to items in motion. These are things that staff continues to be refining, if you will. There's also, conversations around sharing the mower and maybe shared librarian. These are points that we just didn't have time to run to ground yet, but I didn't want to lose sight of them. And these are things that we'll be able to refine our estimates and provide you updates as we move forward. But again, the point is to make sure we capture and don't lose sight of these things. And the last one we've categorized as unfunded finance committee proposals. These are things I think, again, John, you in particular said, boy, it'd be nice to, if we can, we'd like to maybe add these things in. So you'll see the listing of those. And thankfully, Chair Anderson provided his running notes, if you will, and we compared those to ours. So we think we've captured everything, but by all means, all of this is open and, before you for consideration. So let me stop there.
Councilor Cushing?
Yeah, probably we should get clear on what the end game is. And I think that I've heard a couple of things. I think all of us have said we want to get to the 5% net. That's unanimous. That means that the town school budget component of taxes will go up 2.25%. And
Exclusive of the reval, yes.
exclusive of the reval, right? Yeah, I think it's important to kind of keep those things separate because, one, we have complete control over this, 80%, some measure of control. The only control we had was the choice to do it or not do it, and that wasn't much of a choice. So those are market forces. So I think for the purposes of the public and general understanding, we should be focused on the things that we can control and what the tax impact of those things are. So that, so 5% suggested to me that I should clarify that the 5% net budget increase translates to a 2.25% tax increase because we've had real growth in the tax base independent of the valuation. I would also suggest that the way that we keep the tax rate lower and maintain things is by having some level of moderate growth, which basically distributes the cost of doing things over a larger N. So I don't think it's disingenuous to say, yeah, we've had some growth and that's kept taxes down. On the other hand, we said, well, we've had no growth, so all things being equal, your taxes are going up. That's fundamentally what we have. So that's part one. Part two, John, is I've heard you talk about not using fund balance. I've heard other people talk about not using fund balance. And so, and what's that number?
About 1 million.
Yeah, 985.
985.
Okay, yeah. So roughly then, if you want to put it in broad brush, having the target to achieve that, that'd be 2.2 million off this budget.
Okay.
And based on what I've heard from the direct feedback I've gotten is that that's a worthy goal, that we ought to shoot for that and let that be our pencil sharpener, if you will, and see what's the best we can do. And I think that every one of these choices obviously has some impact against things that will be perceived as needs or wants, depending on your point of view. My feeling is that the expectation is to be able to look the taxpayer in the eye and said, we've done our level best to take into account what's going on with the revaluation and to be as conservative as possible with this budget.
Mhm.
So that would be my opinion. What's yours?
Karen, do you have anything you wanna?
I think you guys did a great job capturing what we expressed at our sessions last week, and I'm kind of looking forward to playing with the numbers now and seeing if we can bring it down some.
And I think that's the way I kind of look at things at this point. I feel like we're still at the stage of, let's put everything on paper.
Mhm.
And then once everything is on paper in terms of what options we have, I think that's where we start to make some recommendations. And I think maybe that's a way we can approach the process is there could be like 2 or 3 different objectives, right? That for option A, it could be, we're gonna include fund balance and try and get to 5%. And this is what that would look like, and this is what we would suggest moving. And some of that's already, we're on a pretty clear path for that right now with that 750. I think there is if we don't include fund balance to get to the goal, what else on the list would have to be reconsidered? And then again, if there's other things that, as a body, we want to explore and figure out like how we can look at different things throughout this process, that again, doesn't mean we're going to do it. It just means let's put it on the list. So we have options, and then ultimately what I would like to think we get to is by the workshop where we have the joint workshop with the school and the council, we can kind of present and share those options and say, here's where we think we could go. You know, the most conservative option is this one. The one that gets us just to goal with fund balance is this one. And then here's something in between. And we want to get feedback from the rest of the council in terms of, again, is there anything that they really want to advocate for? Is there anything they want to do? And then we can use that to then go into our final meeting to finalize our recommendations that we would propose at the second read. So that's a way. I'm not saying that's the way we need to do it, but I think it allows us to kind of, you know, prepare what would be a budget that really just uses the fund balance and, you know, the minimal changes we need to do to get to goal. And then again, if there's room to go further, to me, that's a conversation that the full council needs to kind of look at and deliberate and say that makes sense. And we can give them a package that says, here's what we would suggest.
Okay, just one point is that the fund balance exists on both sides of the equation. The school is using fund balance, town is using fund balance.
Mhm.
So I don't have any issues at all with approaching it by saying, okay, we're in the ballpark. We don't need to set a specific goal. We know where we're headed.
Mhm.
Now let's get some things on paper, and the focus of this is on the town side. Tom, you're saying we've got what, 750 already? Is that what you've got? some
760. Yep.
What do you think the number, I didn't do the math on your sheet. I mean, if you net, are we at 750 net of the increases on the sheet, or did you just?
That's 760 to the positive toward the $1.2 million goal.
Okay,
And again, that's a combination of revenue increases because we refined our numbers.
Right.
And expenditure decreases. The net effect is that 760.
right.
Yep.
And all those alternative funding sources, if we go that path, do all of those automatically get us to?
It gets us about 1,050,000.
Okay.
Not all of them. I'm not including any of the school capital, the bleacher replacement or the long range planning.
Is that something that they will have to agree to, or how does that work when it comes to using those capital reserves?
They will certainly need to agree. I think in the past, the finance committee's been persuasive and influential on the Board of Education, or at least their finance committee. I think you heard from them in their presentation. They've got 800,000 in their capital reserve. And they seem to want to reserve that, knowing they've got this wave of kids coming in 2027, and they're not likely to have the ultimate solution in place by then. So they're anticipating needing to spend some money to accommodate for that incoming class in 2027.
What about school impact fees? Can that be used for this? Because it's really about supporting $500,000.
Yeah, I think so. Forgive me, I didn't have Norm get that ready we certainly have those numbers. Just quickly by way of school impact fee, the way we've used those historically, there've been a couple of offhand uses for emergency purchase of portables on a couple of occasions, but for the last 20+ years, what we've done is we've brought it in to offset school debt. It's just kind of a simpler way of doing it. And the way we do it with a level of certainty is that we bring in the amount of actual collections from 2 years prior. So it's not an estimate. We know what we collected and we bring it in as a revenue. And so we follow that same path here. We've had a couple of banner years in 20 and 21 where we had some pretty significant receipts. And I think we're enjoying that in the current year, frankly. Long story short, there's not a terrible amount. There might be a $300,000 or $400,000 in there. I think Norm's trying to source that right now.
Okay.
But to answer your question, I think to offset some of their costs to study a school solution, I think it's a very legitimate use of those funds.
So again, if there's a need to use those, I think what we need to understand from them, because it wasn't clear to me, like what they're reserving those capital reserves specifically for. And if there is a true legitimate need that they've identified, that would be helpful to understand.
Yep.
Because it could be a combination, like, can we do a combination of impact fees and reserve?
Sure.
So
And they
again,
even
that way-
admitted that the 500 that they've included, 500,000 for consulting fees, is an estimate their prior consultant gave them.
Yeah.
It seems to me a lot of the work, or at least some of the work Harriman has produced has lasting value that doesn't need to be redone. Certainly site-specific costs that were incurred, I don't think have much lasting value, but space needs analysis, some of that has to have, must not have to be recreated, I'll say. So my sense is that 500 is probably strong to begin with.
Yeah, I was encouraged to hear that the way they seem to be approaching this is going through and looking at what's been done in the past and deciding whether or not they want to accept it or not. So apparently last time, I think April reported that they reviewed the enrollment numbers and they accepted them. So to your point, the committee may very well go through and say, we're good with this, we're good with this, we're good with this, and this is what's left over. So
Yeah,
But undoubtedly, they will need an engineer to assist in site selection and then site evaluation when a site is chosen, and an architect to help, really plan out the building and give probable cost estimates. So, they'll need several $100,000 to be able to advance a school solution to the voters.
I think, again, the objective would be to try and not appropriate it, right? So if there's
Correct.
ways to not appropriate it or limit the appropriation given that dollar value, I think that would be ideal. And I think we need their guidance on what's possible and what they would recommend to try and bring that down if they can.
To that point, to me, the easiest thing to do and the cleanest thing would be to offset those long-range planning funds with their capital reserve monies. The beauty of that is that if that project materializes, and I expect it will, into a tangible capital project, we are able to pay ourselves back. We could bond those funds, but we need to advance them and make that investment first. The beauty of that is if we do choose to do that at the time, those monies could go right back to that reserve if you wished.
That's
So,
good.
I think it's clean in that respect, and it's a big number.
I mean, do you guys agree that we want to kind of strongly recommend to the school finance committee that they use reserves for this particular item?
Yes, I think what I struggled with is, again, they don't have any solution for 2027. So when you talk about what they have for impact fees, I mean, do they have intentions for those impact fees for 2027? What are their intentions for the capital? We don't know. So
Yeah.
I feel hearing that they can get completely reimbursed for
Yeah.
something that we think is definitely going to come to fruition. I think using capital makes the most sense. Where at first I was like, oh, maybe we could use impact fees, but that's not something you can capture back. So I think that's the best recommendation.
Yeah, I was just reminded, it sounds like we have about 625,000
Oh,
in
that's good
impact fees.
Hmm.
But that will limit our ability in the future to offset school debt costs. So it's a matter of when you want to and how you want to realize those funds.
And it's trended down, fiscal 23 versus 22. So
Okay.
that's something we need to keep in the back of our minds.
Mhm.
And impact fees can only be used towards capital improvements.
The capital costs, it's right, not to offset operational costs.
But because this is a study for capital.
Yeah, I think it can more than pass the straight face test.
Those do, but that's a discussion for
Yeah.
another day.
Yeah.
Well, my opinion is that all of those strategies are well and good, but they aren't really, unless I'm misunderstanding, real savings. It says we're gonna move this, we're gonna use this pile of money instead of this pile of money to accomplish this, and that then is gonna lower this number, and we can spend more over here. I think that my opinion, and I've made this clear on the school side, is that those strategies about how much money is appropriate to use for this or that is different than what real contributions on the school side, what we see to actual expense reductions. So an actual expense reduction, which was kind of a gift, was $373,000 in health insurance costs that came through. Okay, not filling a position would be a real reduction in expense. But deciding we're going to take money out of this bucket instead of this bucket maybe makes things look good on paper, but it doesn't really reduce expenses, unless I'm misunderstanding.
That my goal is not to necessarily just reduce expenses, it's to reduce the impact to taxpayers by leveraging qualified money that we have that's just sitting there towards projects that we could use, so that instead of asking taxpayers to fund it, we're leveraging the impact fees, which are developer paid, or the reserves, which technically was taxpayer money because it was money that came from their fund balance from having too much. That's what their policy is, I believe, is that they every year with their fund balance will their typical approach is apply some of that to offset their tax impact. That's pretty common, right, for them to.
Yeah, they've
always
done it
apply.
every year I've been here. Yep.
And then they apply a portion of that to continue to build their capital reserves, similar to what we try and do, where, ideally we would build a capital reserve so that we can fund some of these things that are like short term. So to me, it's not about cutting, it's about using money we have for qualified projects that allow us to not have to ask taxpayers for more money. Which, again, that impacts the net budget, correct?
Mhm.
So
It does.
that's getting them closer to our goal, which is to get to that net
Yeah,
budget.
the unique thing about this grouping of projects is that they're all proposed to be appropriated. So we need to raise tax dollars to pay for these projects. So to the extent that you do find funding sources other than raising taxes in FY 25 to do them, there is an immediate bottom line benefit. That's not to say your strategy can also include expenditure reductions, so they don't spend as much as well.
Mhm.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that in this climate, some cutting all by itself is needed. I think you've come up with a list of things
Mhm.
that can be reduced, real changes. And if we talk about the approach to this, John, where you're saying, well, okay, let's talk about broadly where we're headed and then get some things on the table. Well, I would categorize them as real cost savings, reallocations, or uses of different kinds of funds, and then the bottom line. So that when I see a list that says we're going to cut this, which you just provided,
Mhm.
I say that should be step one. What things can we take out, and what are the impact of those things? And then step two is, okay, now maybe we can still do some of these things if we reallocate, use other funding.
Mhm.
But in terms of an approach, I think my inexperience is a strength and a weakness here. Okay, is that when I'm sitting here and having trouble having the sense of, that we're doing some hand waving here. I'm trying to be the conscience of the taxpayer and say, kind of make it simple for me. Show me what you took out, show me what you put back in,
Mhm.
where the money came from. So
I-
I'll stop
I-
there.
I think there's probably a third category of like, this updated medical insurance premiums, that was essentially an overestimate in the.
Right.
So I think I like how they have the recommended adjustments section, because to me, those are like things that come in with better data. It's not a cut, it's actually, we got better estimates and those estimates are favorable for us. And so I think we're gonna get some of those too from potentially the assessor, as he talked about how this will, he'll have updates as well. So I feel like we need a section that's just like general adjustments that happen as the information becomes available, plus what's being reduced and removed or deferred completely. And then the shifting of money to try and make sure that we can appropriate from other sources that don't require taxpayer dollars. You guys look like you have
Well,
thoughts.
yeah, could I just offer a suggestion, based on the recommended adjustments, let's say it's 760, it's close enough.
Mhm.
If you look at the alternative funding sources, and I'm just limiting this conversation to those to be funded with TIF funds as opposed to appropriations.
Mhm.
That gets us over 1 million. So I might suggest one strategy is for you to work toward that 1.2 million, and we're damn near there already, without even talking about the school piece, in terms of the school reserves. Undoubtedly, there'll be other refinements we bring. I think we'll get to the 1.2 very easily.
Mhm.
Then there may be an additional step you wish to take, and you could take any number of approaches. On the town side, you could be very surgical and say, I like this, I don't like that. On the school side, you gotta be a little more careful, right? Your bottom line focused only. So one strategy past councils have used is, we want to get to this magical place. School, we need you to take X out. Town, I want you to take X number of dollars out and go to work and come back to us with what your recommendations are. And that's proven to be fairly successful in the past. Again, you don't have line item authority over the school, but if I were you, I'd want to know what choices they will likely make with a lesser funding than they've asked. And that's been used in the past and used quite successfully, but that's kind of the step 2. I think we can get to the initial step of 5% without any of that heavy lifting, frankly, any of the cutting.
That approach to me feels at this stage of the game like stick, and we're still working on carrot. Okay, in other words, when we just say, get this number out of me.
There's no carrots in this business.
Yeah.
It's all sticks at this point.
Right. I think that the other point I would make, and you've heard this, that the sign of a good negotiation is when everybody is a little unhappy. And my sense personally of this is, when I raise my hand, I want to be a little unhappy. I want to be unhappy because maybe I didn't get as much as I wanted, but I also want to be unhappy because I had to vote on stuff that I think might be good and necessary, but in this climate, I felt like we needed to forego it.
Well, I'm prepared to be proportionally unhappy.
Good.
Proportionally. That's
All right.
But it really comes down to you sizing what that final step is, where we need to get to.
Mhm.
And I say that qualifying it by, within certain orders of magnitude, of course.
Well, right, if you ask me for a number right now, I'd say it's probably, on both sides, 2.2. Or it's, 2 times the town.
From 5% or from where we started?
I'm talking about cash. So we're at, from 5%. So,
So another
oh,
2.2.
no, I'm sorry. It's from, I misunderstood you.
Yeah.
No, 1.2 gets us to
Yeah.
5%, and another million gets us to what?
2.2.
Prevents us from using fund balance. Gets us over that hurdle.
Mhm. Which again, I would say I'm still an advocate that we use fund balance. I'm just not sure we use it to get to goal. Yeah, I mean, I feel, again, I look at, so Tom, are you saying what we've been able to come to just on the town side is 1.2 million in potential reductions?
Just
that-
over 1 million,
Okay,
not 1, 2.
just over 1 million.
And I can walk you through where that comes from if you like.
Maybe what we need to ask the school is match us, come to us with 1 million of options, which that 500,000 capital reserve would get them halfway there. Would this be in addition to the 300,000 that they provided?
Well, again, I come back to, okay, we can get to your number by going to the piggy bank. Well, okay, I didn't buy a boat this week because I didn't want to go to the piggy bank. Okay, so I think it's, let me just put it straight away. It's what position isn't going to get filled. It's which capital project isn't going to get funded. It's those kinds of things at the top.
Mhm.
And to say, that's not to say that it needs to get you all the way there, but to date, I've made this clear to Shannon and anyone who will listen, is to say that, we really do need to see this year some meaningful reduction. And I say it because as we speak, every Monday, there's a group of community people who are trying to solve this school problem. There are people in town who would like to get a community center. There's real stuff out there that we need to do. And in order to do that, we need to take this year to be more conservative. That's my opinion.
Mhm.
And so,
I mean,
and I've said, put it out there. And personally, if I really believe that the things that you are doing are going to materially affect the education of our children. Remember, I started as a teacher. I worked with kids for a good portion of my life. I get that. But I also understand that, they're pretty resilient. They can.
So Liam, could you just pull up the running sheet again? I just forgive me or indulge me for a moment. Under the recommended adjustments, it's remarkably proportional right now. So if you look at the top, the school's cuts are 360 reductions, I should say, are $368,000, right? Majority of that is in fact the insurance. For the town's purposes down below, ours is 390, and that's a combination of some expense reductions, but also some revenue increases. So right now to date, without any kind of pain, not affecting any programs, so on either side, that's the 760. And then I'm prepared to walk you through alternative funding sources for 4 of the projects here that get us over $1 million, just over $1 million, $1,050,000 or so. Again, I would argue that that's no pain, right? That's not affecting anything. We're able to advance all of these projects and legitimately pay them using alternative funding sources.
Mhm.
And the final gap to be closed, I'm confident we'll do that between now and maybe even your next meeting. So again, let's assume we're at 5%. I guess I look to you for guidance beyond that. How far do you want to go? And then we can talk about how to get there.
Is there,
I heard 2.2 was, so another million beyond that is what I heard.
Didn't just make that, but I went through the school budget in detail. And I've been saying, I went through the school budget in detail. I've been saying at the outset, I'm not an expert here. Okay, I don't pretend to know exactly what and where should be made up. But I think that, I'll come from my experience in the healthcare world, where I was responsible for budgets, and I said, And, somebody said to me, here's the number, go meet it, right? And then I relied on the people who were experts in the surgery center and in patient services and procurement of drugs and this, that, and the other thing, facilities management, to figure out how we were going to get to the number that my job depended on. So I don't feel qualified in this case to go to the school department and say, here's what you should do. I certainly have qualified to sit and listen to somebody say, well, these are the changes that seem to be within the spirit of what you're asking for. And this is what the impact of those are. And I think any one of us then can make a judgment to say, is the cost of doing that too high?
Yeah.
I don't know. I need to see it in front of me.
So maybe for simplicity is the ask to the school, come back to us with a similar list of new adjustments that include those same three categories we were talking about. And we want it to total up to $1 million. And if that's cutting things, reassigning sources, not doing CIP, like we want to see what, like if you had to get to $1 million on your end, what that would look like outside of what they had previously provided. So $1 million in addition, or is it inclusive of what they've already provided?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
exactly.
inclusive or exclusive of the insurance premiums? I'm saying this because Carolyn Gammon did message me saying she watched last night and she didn't quite get clear guidance and she's hoping for clear guidance today. So I think if we give something specific to say, if you can come back to us next week with, or whenever they have their next finance committee meeting, with $1 million additional adjustments beyond what's been provided, which excludes the capital reserve piece, like they can figure out whether they want to.
That's, I assume that would be available to
Yeah.
them to consider. Yep.
Yeah. And just come back to us and show us what it would look like. And then we can make some
Yeah. I mean,
recommendations.
I was just looking ahead here. There's two projects to be deferred, the Running Hill Road Master Plan and the facilities assessment. I think we'd like to do them both, but is this progress going to stop? Is the world going to fall apart? No, we can defer those for a year. There's 200,000 that's appropriated. You're at 1.2 already, right now. So I guess I'm trying to just focus on what is that next step and hopefully the final step to get to where you think you need to get to.
I don't think there's anything more, personally, I'm interested from you guys on this list that the town can explore or contribute. The only other thing that I think could be put on the table, which to me would be like the last thing we would do, is to look at non-union wages potentially, to say, is there an opportunity to, rather than do the full 4.7%, do we say we're going to cap it at 3%? And what does that look like in terms of savings? Like, I think that to me I was trying to think of, like, other than this list, where else could we look for money if we decided to go further? And it would really come from non-union wages, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything else.
I would beg you to allow me to find other sources than that. That's not where I would recommend we go. That sends, I think, a message to our critical staff that I don't want to send, and may force them to choose to go the way of solidarity as well. So
Make me want to unionize.
that's
So-
crap. So I hear you, and that's where a lot of our costs are, but allow me to look for elsewhere other than that.
I don't think you need to look elsewhere at this point with the 1.2 that we have at this point
Mhm.
and the items that are in motion. I'm just saying that is probably the only other place that I could think, unless there are cuts to programming or things that I don't think we can. I didn't see any in the conversations we had with staff that led me to think there's anything substantial we could cut at this point. It really is about
Mhm.
wage increases is the only area, it seems.
It is, we've prioritized that. I mean, that's where we started and where we'll end this conversation on budget is that's our priority this year.
I completely agree with that priority. Frankly, I'm impressed that you've gotten as much as you have so far on the other side of it. You know, when we sat through the town's presentations, I didn't hear, you know, when the police department comes in and says, you know, what were they, 2% or something like that? And it was all in people. Fire department, pretty much the same. You know, all of the major departments that have a lot of money running through them, I felt like, you know, I could listen to what they're saying and I could make a judgment that this isn't fluffy. You know, we can't not buy a switch for the IT system. You know, certain of this stuff, you're just inviting disaster if you let it go. So, you know, and what do we sit there for 12 hours or some, Karen, you know exactly.
Who's counting?
It was a lot of hours and I was tired at the end of it, but, you know, I didn't find myself, nodding off and, so, I mean, it was, people's presentations were, interesting and compelling.
Yeah.
So,
So just to close the loop on the school, just to make sure we can give Carolyn their guidance on their finance committee. So would you guys support, and maybe we'll motion to vote on this, that we ask the school finance committee to come back to us with $1 million of adjustments that's not in addition to what's already included in just this recommended adjustments section. And it's not saying that they have to cut $1 million. We're saying that could include those 3 categories of, you know, good news that comes up, that's still items in motion. It could include, you know, using different colored money to pay for things, and it could include, and we expect to see some reductions, some actual cost savings for things being deferred or removed. But we want to give them that $1 million to work through at this point.
yes, and you asked me whether or not we should include the health insurance
Mhm.
piece. And my number after reviewing the budget, a number that I would have given them in that joint presentation was about 700,000. And then Kate came in and said, whoa, we just got a gift of 3. So I increased my number to $1 million. So,
Yeah, and again,
so
this,
I would say,
Yeah.
I think, you know, when the real amount that I thought they could find in there, exclusive of the health insurance gift, as they put it, was about 700. So
Okay.
if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say, yeah, $1 million inclusive. So
Okay.
you're
so
already,
I'm gonna
already
move, I'm gonna
30% there.
I'm gonna motion that we request the school to come back to us with an adjustment of $1 million in addition to what's already been adjusted up to this date, which is just the total of $368,000.
In addition to?
Is that,
Done, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
that's what I thought he said
No.
was that.
That's not what he said.
No,
Oh.
he was saying 700,
700
300,
more.
$1 million total, less the 300, 700,000 more.
I think
Oh, okay.
I'm leaning towards John. If we can at least maybe give them instructions to see if they can find another million. And if they come back and they say we only find 700, great. I mean, it's not saying we're cutting another million plus the 300,000.
Yeah.
Not to pick on
I will
this.
not disagree with you. I'm just
Okay.
trying to be
Well,
consistent.
can I get a
and
second
honest.
for my
Second.
motion?
Yeah.
Second discussion?
No,
Karen, you want to repeat what you just said?
Yes, I think it is appropriate to ask the school to go back and find another million on top of the 300,000 they've already saved.
Okay, all those in favor?
Just be clear, they can go capital or
Yeah.
operating. Okay.
Yeah, it is, you know, it's up to them to come back to us and show us their path. And then what about on the town side? So
Yeah.
Tom has already, it sounds like, Tom, you have 1.2 in here?
Well, I'd like to walk you through that and get you to vote on that,
Okay.
on those pieces, if you're ready to.
Yep.
So let's assume for this conversation, we've already captured this 758. So in the alternative funding sources, the first three capital projects, Sawyer Street, that's the local match, the AED replacement, the radio study, and then I would like to add the last new item, which is the UPS for the public safety building. All of those I've determined are eligible for downtown TIF funds. And the next conversation, I'm going to explain how we're going to have funds available, but those projects, and if my math's right, that's 234,000 in total.
260.
We've got our finance director here. Norm, can you just add those four numbers up?
Uh,
75, 65, 50, and 70.
Just as a broad observation, one of the things that I
120 is
found oftentimes missing was totals.
Yeah.
It was, and then I would try to cut and paste the numbers into a spreadsheet so I could get to the total.
and then you back,
But that's his discussion.
Add the 70.
later.
add the 70. Oh,
Yeah, it's 125, right? Yep.
They're all, you just need to add up all the numbers.
Yeah, the-
Forgive the parentheses, there should be parentheses as well, it's 260.
okay, all right, yeah.
So there's 260 to the 758.
Which numbers matter?
And so Tom, when you're saying that there was already an additional 260 of TIF funds just sitting there and we're not cutting anything else that was asked?
No, but I've got to walk you through how we're gonna do that. I've got to shift some, pay for them out of a different TIF account than I originally proposed.
Okay.
And I'd love to,
So can you show us that before we
Yep.
vote on approving these?
if you could pull up the next, I think it's organized in the packet, should be right after this. This was an exhibit, in the budget book. And we have two TIF funds, the Higas Parkway TIF, and the downtown TIF. And forgive me, but I wanted you to appreciate the limitations of each. And so I also included the approvals from the state in terms of what the qualified uses are for the various TIF funds. They're both at 100% capture rate. But they do have distinctly different allowed uses. The Higas Parkway TIF is really limited to paying for the infrastructure, or more importantly, the debt related to the infrastructure to build that area out, and cover SEDCO expenses explicitly. Whereas the downtown TIF, very consciously, and John, you were part of this, we really scoured through the statute and really maximized, gave ourselves maximum flexibility under the statutory guidance and allowances for almost the most flexible use of TIF funds. So we have a lot more opportunity there. So this schedule that Liam has up here shows the downtown TIF first. And in my proposed budget, you'll see at the top here, based on performance last year, we're starting the year with about 184,000 in the TIF fund. Nick has advised that, and this estimate is actually now 2.97, not 2.92 million, and that's based on his revised numbers. And then you'll see below in the red what I propose, how I propose to use the funds. And so there's broken into operating and capital investments. You know, we can go through all of these, but I have analyzed and considered the allowed uses and think all of these do qualify under the DCD guidance. Notably on that list, the second one is SEDCO costs. And what I would propose we do is to actually move the SEDCO costs and pay for them under the Higas Parkway TIF. And in doing so, free up another $316,000.
Does that though impact what you had shared in terms of fund balance and how we were going to be able to?
Slightly. And so if you just scroll down, Liam, you'll see that based on what I proposed, and this was to put all of the Higas Parkway TIF revenue toward reducing the general fund deficit. So we were projected to get 141. Nick's revised estimate is actually going up to 164. So there's 230,000 more that I'll improve the schedule.
Okay.
So long story short, my proposal had us within $210,000 of paying that off fully by the end of the year. The effect of this is we'll have 500 left. We have 4 more years on the Highgate Parkway TIF, so we'll get paid. It's going to be delayed that final 500 one more year.
Mhm.
I don't think that's a hardship whatsoever. So to do this, to free up the money in the downtown TIF, I propose that we pay for Sedco under Highgate Parkway and then include those 4 projects we just discussed under the downtown TIF. And I can produce a revised schedule that reflects all that for
Yeah,
you.
I think that'd be good. Karen, you,
Well, I mean, I appreciate the conversation, but before we were talking about potential defers and like, I mean, I just want to say, like, I would love to see Running Hill, you know, the master plan. I still want to see those things in there. I also, I get discouraged when those are quick, easy cuts, because I'm like, I wonder if there are other places we can. And I
Yep.
just kind of wanted to bring that to the conversation, because I
Mhm.
would love to be able to get certain things back in there or keep them in there.
We're not to the deferments yet. These are projects that I'm just proposing an alternative funding source for CIP projects. That the next conversation would be those. So Norm, can you do the math quick? Just add 260 to the 758.
One oh one eight.
1018, so 1,000,000,
1,082,000.
so 1,020,000 is where we're at right now.
so can you help me understand one more time? So the TIF numbers have changed. Have they changed favorably or unfavorably?
Favorably,
Okay, so
they
we've
favored-
gotten more revenue than we
correct.
anticipated?
Favorably, simply because when Nick first gave me these estimates, he was working on a projected mill rate of $10.75. This is back last month. Last night, he presented 11.14 as the projected mill rate.
Okay.
That change in mill rate produces these changes here.
Okay,
So higher mill rate will produce more tax dollars.
so essentially, we've just increased our TIF revenues by the changes.
By the change in the
And
tax
order
rate.
to fund these projects, we have to move Sedco to the Hagus because that's where it's qualified to make
Right.
room to use the new funds to fund.
And my proposal is to fund these other 4 CIP projects with the remaining downtown funds.
Okay,
So that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
I just want to refresh my understanding of TIFs from a taxpayer perspective. So if I pay $1 in taxes outside of a TIF,
Mhm.
then the state is going to come in and assess a portion of that. Is that correct? I mean, I may not be doing it technically correct, but the value of the dollar to the town outside the TIF is something less than $1. And a dollar that
No,
is.
the other way around. The value of a dollar, tax dollar outside of a TIF is $1. The value of a dollar inside a TIF is less than a.
No, yeah, you could say it either way. It's essentially a dollar inside tax structure. We get to hold on to the entire dollar. It's being sheltered.
Thank you.
That's.
But the
Yeah.
dollar outside is being, the benefit of that is being reduced by a product of general purpose aid to education, which takes into consideration increased value, state revenue sharing, and then also county tax. Because you're paying a county tax on that valuation, but you're otherwise sheltering it.
So my tax dollar is exempt from the clutches of all of those other people when it's inside the TIF.
Mhm.
But in doing so, you're limited to how you can use them.
Yes, I understand that very clearly, which is why we're shifting things around and trying to use that
Yep.
money. But it's important to understand that because it's not just moving things from one budget column to another. It's essentially a more efficient use of funds, and that does benefit the taxpayer.
That's right.
And, you know, I'm saying this some to reinforce my understanding and some for the record, because there are people who
Correct.
watch this.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we're clear and transparent about what we're doing here.
Is there a way we can estimate for the TIFs? I don't know if this is easy, like the revenue that we're generating this year. Like what would that have been if it was general fund and not TIF? Like, is it the 58% of it is essentially what we would have? And the incremental benefit is that 42% of the revenue that we would have otherwise had to pay additional potential
Yeah,
taxes on?
That's my recollection from when I sent myself to TIF 101, but.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure the
Number sounds
58%
right.
still holds, but it, in finding a direct line and being able to show you tangibly where that benefit exists, there's no straight line to it because it's masked as part of this really complicated formula on school funding.
Mhm.
It also lags 1 and 2 years depending on which
Yeah, that's true.
piece you're talking about. So it's really hard to show a direct line, the shelter benefit per se.
Mhm.
But if there was none, we would not be doing it.
Correct.
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 And it's not de minimis, it's
Mhm.
material, it's significant.
No, I remember when we originally talked about it, it was 58% on the dollar at that time. And at the low end, it was no less than 8%. I would argue even 8% is worth it. 8% is not nothing. It's somewhere in between those two numbers.
So to Karen's point about the CIP items that were gonna get removed, the Running Hill Road one, what was the facilities assessment, a TIF one? I can't recall.
No, these are both appropriation.
Even the Running Hill Road one was, I thought that was, okay.
This is a study. So
Okay.
But
Yeah, I
maybe I
mean-
can make it easy. Why don't you task me with coming up with the rest between the 1,018,000 and 1.2?
So to get to, sorry, what's the number you're trying to get to?
well, if you
One
guys,
point two to the 5%. I was just trying to,
so if we come back with, so we've obviously represented 760,000 to start. We're proposing through these other to get to 1.2. You're asking the school for 1, which would get you to the total of 2.2.
Yeah.
The effect of which would allow you to meet your 5% goal without using fund balance, right?
Yeah, and then we could still use fund balance if we wanted to.
If you want to bring that
additionally-
down. An additional million would bring it down to a net increase of 3.75%,
Mhm.
which would probably have a real tax rate implication of 1,
yeah, we can do that calculation. I haven't done it, but
which would bring the average down
Yeah.
to less than 6 with the revale.
Mhm.
yeah, 5% is, net is 2.25% on the tax rate. 375 is gonna be just above 1.
So I'm comfortable with that recommendation for the town to get to 1.2 in total, inclusive of
What we
the
just
current
talked
recommended
about. Yep.
adjustments that we have.
I'm just gonna round it up to 200,000 just to make the
Mhm.
goal easier to work toward.
Okay. All right,
So would you mind, I guess I would suggest if you would take a motion to capture what we just discussed regarding those 4 CIP projects, and I will start the next meeting with an updated slide to show you the effect of all that.
so I move that we accept Tom's recommendation to adjust the 4 TIFs CIP items and make the changes as recommended between the Haggis and the downtown TIF. For us to see the impacts of that at our next meeting and come forward with an additional $200,000 in recommendations.
Yes,
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Yay.
All right.
no.
So with this, effectively, we have at least a pathway to get to a $2.2 million reduction or
Change.
adjustment option that will help us make our recommendations as we go forward. We need to discuss what we want to do with fund balance after that, potentially, if we can use it. So do we want to jump to that conversation, or is there anything else in this list that we want to discuss or clarify, or is there anything that was missing that you guys may want to add?
I would just note that the pickup truck for community services, we could use beach reserves as opposed to appropriation, if that's something you'd wish to consider.
And is that
In that
item
list of
motion?
alternative funding,
Okay,
we didn't capture it in your last motion, though.
I mean, that makes sense to me to use those reserves.
That's what it's going to do, is to support the beach operations running back and forth in the ranger.
Does that mess up Todd's budget? Or?
No, he and
reserves
I
all?
talked about it. In fact, to his credit, he brought that forward as a suggestion.
Then I move that we modify the budget to include the pickup truck with beach reserves.
Second?
Does that come off my 200,000?
No. Any discussion?
Is it a used truck? No.
All those in favor?
Small truck.
All right,
Okay, so that was another 57,000. The other items are really truly in motion, so let us continue to work on them and report to you in subsequent meetings.
the only thing not captured in your list, and it's not gonna be an adjustment, but it's more the conversation we had at the meeting about how to update the capital improvement plan to include the big school that's coming, or whatever the program is. Again, they talked about potentially just updating the narrative, which I would personally be fine with. I just want to make sure we don't lose sight that we had that conversation for them to go back and make that adjustment. That was the only thing I saw that I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of that.
Is that something, a directive you want to give to the Board of Education to come back with a proposal as to how to reflect?
I assume they took that from our meeting to come back with something. I don't know if we need to make a motion on it unless you guys want to make a motion.
John, the other option is to be clear with Carolyn that when maybe the two bodies convene again, they're in a position to advise.
Yeah.
Either what that number is or how to make sure that a school project is coming within this 5-year window somewhere.
That's all I want to make sure is that the narrative is clear on that, because it wasn't clear. Or
It's
not that the narrative wasn't clear, it was that we know that there's a big capital project coming. It's unfair to ask for a number because we don't know what that is, but we need to have that in our CIP as a placeholder or something that just says something big is coming, because we need that as we look at our entire capital plan.
From a transparency point of view, I suspect it's the worst kept secret in town.
Yeah.
It's out there. There's a big number.
Kind of conspicuous by its absence.
Yeah, fair enough.
In the numbers. You know, as long as we're on capital budgets, within this ongoing discussion, I believe we're going to have a presentation of the community center, on the 23rd? Somewhere.
24th is the
24th,
open house.
The open house?
The open house, yeah. And you had said in the budget presentations, which is something that impressed me, is that the operating cost for that is sort of built in. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, actually, Councilor Shoup is closer to this than I am, but the working theory had always been, I think consultants in the committee spent a lot of time understanding that very thing. Once they understood what sort of amenities were in the building, they were actually able to do financial takeoffs in terms of what's going to cost us to run a pool of that size and other facilities, and in turn, how much revenue can they produce? And perhaps off the top of your head, but I think it's in the 80% range,
The
90%.
consultant came back very rough numbers. Todd went back at it and came back at 90. So
90%.
90%
Okay.
self-sufficient.
So that's impressive.
Except for
because-
debt costs, just operating expense.
I understand that, but what that means is that you build it, and then what you're not bond funding operating expenses or increasing taxes to fund operating expenses. You're essentially buying a building for which we are just essentially moving this block of expenses into the new.
We've got to front the capital expense, though.
Yeah.
I had asked Todd to point out in the budget what he's paying for the hub, because I want people to realize, like, that's funds that would directly be going right to a community center. That's already part of his budget.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get sidetracked on that, but I can't
But
easily.
the reason,
Well, I
the
think that
reason
was-
that I wanted to bring that forward is that it was a surprise to me to learn it, and I believe it might be a surprise to other people to learn it, is that what we're buying is the principal and interest cost of a facility when that comes forward. And we are moving, it's sort of like you build a new home and you move all of your furniture and everything else into it. You don't have to replace that.
So
So I just think it's worth underscoring that.
So I guess I want to make sure I understand. So in terms of the operations of the community center, the initial data modeling is showing it would be 90% self-funded and only 10% of
Mhm.
that would have to be asked for taxpayers. But I also think the point was made that what percentage of, if we sunsetted the hub, because we now have this, would apply to our debt service or our payments, so that way, again, are we, what's like the impact, the true impact to the taxpayer in terms of how much they're spending? It sounds like 10% of operating costs,
Mhm.
but if we sunset the hub, there's gonna be an offset for any principal and interest we pay. Is that
Sort of,
essentially
sort of the analysis around, you know, we're leasing a car right now.
Yeah,
And if we go and buy, so there's already something in our budget
yeah,
to satisfy those payments, right?
Mhm.
And the question is, how much of
Yeah.
that
yeah,
is, what's the, you know, how much is the debt service on top of that 10% gap for operations compared to what we're paying right now?
Yeah.
Through the operation of the hub.
and I think that's a super important message once we know that, to tell people. Like, I think hearing that helped me a little bit be more comfortable with putting the community center on earlier. I still feel personally like I would want the school to be like solid before we moved it, but I wouldn't stand in the way of it going early if that was the will of the council. the will of the
We'll
public.
do that analysis. We know now what the estimated cost of it is. We can do an amortization schedule and come out with a pretty accurate principal and interest cost. What I can tell you is the hub cost built into this budget is at least 185,000. So I would dare say that should cover at least half of the P and I cost for the community center, but we can be more exact.
Yeah. Again, were there any other ads or things missing that you guys took away from last week? Or new things that have come up since that you want to make sure we get added to the list or have future conversations on?
I mean, when I go down to the bottom of the unfunded finance committee proposals, I wonder if there is room to use TIF funds or anything to do the budgeting software, the position for engineering and technical position that we had talked about, I don't know about IT per se. But maybe would those be qualified uses? There's certain things I don't want to see go. And I'm great that we're getting to
Yeah.
there, but I'm watching all these things fall off that
Yeah.
I think are super important. But I know you guys are gonna do your job.
Yeah. And that's a good question. Like, I was curious, given all the work that the engineering team does with all of the transportation projects that are happening, especially as a result of the downtown TIF. Could we actually be using some of that to pay a partial piece of their salaries as part of operating? Or do we already have that in there? Okay,
We do. At least of existing staff, whether or not a part of a new staff person could also be qualified.
Yeah.
I think it could be argued.
part of my thoughts in terms of the staffing piece, maybe rather than trying to fully fund them as a full year, maybe it's a mid-year hire. So that way, at least for next year's budget, we would only have the partial cost and not the full cost. Again, we would get the full cost the next year, so that would automatically increase
Yeah,
their budget, but
And I bring it up just because, I mean, this is a department that is implementing one of our big goals,
Yeah.
conservation and 30 by 30, and we are doing a substantial amount of different studies. And with my conversation with Angela was like, what do you do once you get these studies? Is it just you and
Yeah.
Jamie just implementing all these? And I think that's where she's like, that's the reality is,
Yeah.
and I do feel like sometimes we're playing catch up to our neighbors when it comes to some of this stuff.
So more, I think that requires, I think the direction is you guys come back to us with your next recommendation. and come prepared to
Mhm.
share how some of these things are possible, not possible. So then again, we can have that conversation at our next meeting in terms of where we may want to move things around potentially or go deeper. So let's pause on the sheet that's been shared and let's
Okay.
again shift to conversation on fund balance.
Okay.
Again, I'll kick us off. So again, I'm super supportive of using fund balance this year because of the unique situation with the reval and particularly because the overlay is the source of
Mhm.
where we're kind of taking that money from, which is a direct result of the work the assessor does. So I feel like there's a good connection there. And I'd like to see us use that as like extra money to try and help us get, you know, as, help taxpayers as best we can. So I'm supportive of using it. I just would like to see us use it as extra money. Again, if we have to use it to get to goal, I wouldn't want it to be the full million. I would, if we have to use 200,000 of it to get to where we need to, that's one thing, but that's just my perspective on the fund balance.
Mhm.
Don or Karen?
Not, my general perspective is more of a question. I wish I had some more data. It's when I'm thinking about the reval and, there's this perception that we're taxing people out of our homes, I don't know where the big increases in value have come. We don't have any sort of income information about, so we don't have an objective way of sort of gauging what the real impact is, okay? So I have a way of gauging it. I can look personally and I can say, oh, I think this is the number, and I can look at it historically, and I can look at it in the future, and I can say, I don't like it, but it's not going to kill me, okay? But I'm thinking to myself, well, I wonder how many people are in my situation, and how many people does this materially affect? Does it have them sitting at the kitchen table going, geez, hon, I think we need to pack up and move somewhere? And I don't know how to gauge that, but there's rhetoric that says this is dire and it's terrible and the earth is ending. And then I think it would be just as bad to say, well, it's no big deal, people price it in. So it's someplace in between. And so when we talk about using fund balance to kind of help the taxpayer, I know that when we voted to put in the taxpayer assistance refund, that we were helping 1,800 families who were in, or 1,800 people who were in a particular bracket of income. So that you can sort of say, all right.
Well, there was no income associated with that program, state's program,
But 400, we have about 400 and.
in our local program.
Yeah. 480.
Well, we just funded something to the tune of,
$250.
Yeah, so that's for our locally funded program that is income based, right?
like that, but that's my point, is that we understand who it's helping and how much.
Yes.
Okay, and then what we don't have a profile on is what is the economic impact of the reval in real terms? In other words, who gets hurt real bad, who doesn't? We have information on a certain percentage who received funding, received the state program last year. So when I come back to the fund balance and say, well, we could ease pain in that group somehow, that would make some sense to me.
I think,
So I'm sensitive to the fact that this reval is going to produce some real pain at some kitchen tables. And when I think about using fund balance, it might be to find a way to moderate that pain.
Yeah.
Mhm.
but I think it goes back to our taxpayers have historically, at least since I've been on council, experienced an average of a 2% tax increase. So that's been what people have been expecting year over year. And so I think regardless of your socioeconomic status, when you get your tax bill and you see a 7% plus, like that is gonna be a shock, no matter where you are. And just because some people maybe have higher incomes, they also, people tend to live within their means, and so it is gonna impact everyone, some people to different degrees. And again, I think ultimately it's subjective when they open their tax bill, how they choose to react to it. So like, I don't think we are doing this just for one specific group. It's really about, this is a unique year where, because of economic forces, particularly with home values relative to commercial, people can expect a 4.75% tax increase estimated right now, which is more even than what we have done historically. So again, I
Sure.
think we're trying to show people that we're acknowledging that we've had this relatively modest tax increase year over year. A lot of things are outside of our control, but using fund balance is within our control to try and moderate that as best we can. So I like to see it less of a tool to moderate our budget goal, more as a tool to moderate the impacts that we know this is gonna have to our community as a whole. That's just my perspective. Counselor Shoup?
Sure. So I read the memo that we got from Joe Kuchera, and I mean, I agree. I think this is like a very unique situation, and I don't think we should be using fund balance, and relying on it for our budget. But he did provide examples of towns that actually do that, so it's not unheard of. And I mean, he also, I think, my takeaway was that this is not, we don't want to create a financial policy that implements that. That's not what we're doing here. I think we're showing the residents and showing everyone that this is a very unique situation, and we're trying to be creative. And I mean, I think the other takeaway, in my understanding, was that, ultimately, this didn't affect the other towns' bond ratings. Even though they looked at it negatively, it did not bring them down. And I think that's a consideration as well. So this is out of the norm of something I think Scarborough maybe does, but I'm with John. I really want to, I want to minimize the impact to the residents as much as we can this year. And then I think everyone's eyes are going to be very wide open after this year, no matter what. And it won't be as shocking and surprising moving forward, hopefully.
Yeah.
Just if I could speak to it, this is the final piece I added to my proposed budget. It was not where I started. And if I was to use it to reach a political goal, I would have proposed more, and we would have been at 5% at the beginning. But I think the measured approach I've used, looking back just 3 years at overlay specifically, these are monies that we raised that we did not need. There's no need to carry them over. More importantly, we've been over 10 years, and I'm very proud of the fact that we've not used fund balance on the town side very consciously. And we've been scratching our way, building our fund balance to be comfortably compliant with our policy, which we are. The final piece that gave me a unique confidence this year is that we've got a situation with the Higas Parkway TIF. We've got guaranteed fund balance. I can say with certainty, I've never been able to say that before, that I know what's going to happen by virtue of that alone is going to have positive effect. And we've calculated and factored the impact of that. And it still lands us at the very top end of our policy. So I don't believe this is a reckless or a gimmicky use. I think if not now, when, given the uniqueness of the Revell and the comfort associated with the certainty of those funds from the Higas Parkway TIF, I make this recommendation full-throated to you that, I would not make it if I thought it was irresponsible, and I don't believe it is.
I agree. And I think it's, it goes back to it's taxpayer money that we have a unique year. While I know from a long-term perspective, building our fund balance is important, but it seems like we're positioned at least until the Higas Parkway TIF expires, which that expires in a couple of years, right? That's not.
Yes. Yep.
We will, at least over the next 3 to 4 years, right? Is that how much longer?
It will be the first tax payment in FY26, and we will have paid back the general fund in its entirety.
But that TIF only goes until when for the Higas one?
In 28, it expires.
So we'll have,
Frankly, we're either going to have to shut that down or go back and get additional uses of funds because we won't have enough qualified uses
Mhm.
as soon as FY 26.
Okay,
So to be clear, Tom et al. Has come up with a 1.2 million in savings. We're asking the school for 1 million. And then in addition to that, we're going to discuss how we further assist the taxpayers with fund balance. Is that essentially what you're saying?
yep,
And yeah, and so within that context, I'm fine with it conceptually. Because I think that our first obligation is to show some fiscal discipline as best we can without being stupid or coming at it with a hatchet.
mhm,
And then to your point, then it is taxpayer money, which if it goes back into the mix, and that further reduces the tax impact on folks, that's a good thing.
yep.
Yes.
Right, Counselor Shoup?
So this is a finance committee meeting, and I didn't know if everyone could appease me for a couple minutes at the end to get some guidance for one of the committees.
Yeah.
It's totally unrelated to the budget, but I
Yeah.
did want to come to you guys when we're done. if
Yep.
we're
I
wrapping
think
up.
we're good probably on the agenda items we had. I guess for the next meeting, just to make sure if there are any specific areas you guys want to explore further, it sounds like we're gonna get a recommendation back from the town. I don't know if the school, they have a finance committee meeting on Monday, so this may help to shape their meeting. I don't know if they'll get to a full million recommendation at that point, but it would be good if we can, if you can.
Yeah, I can't promise that I'm gonna have all the answers for my 200. I'll make every effort between now and then. Just a quick turnaround.
Yeah, that's fine.
Between
So,
meetings, but I will certainly start off with a cleaned up list that's gonna capture what you've done by way of your actions. So I think it'll be much clearer. And then to the extent that I can provide additional information on how to make that additional step for the 200. And I can speak to Kate to see what their schedule is and likelihood of them being in a position to report as soon as next week is.
okay. So I guess with that, then should we meet next week? Like, it sounds like if you're not gonna have, if you might need a little bit more time, is there a need to meet? Or do we want to give Tom and the school time?
Well,
Or are there other agenda items? that
well,
you
I
guys
think
wanna-
the big question for me, apart from this year's budget, is having a real conversation about next year, and particularly in terms of the way we structure the presentation of the data, some of those kinds of things. And I'm not sure when that should happen or how.
We may
You
have
know,
time.
with Tom's permission, I'd be happy to sit with you and Norm and
Mhm.
tell you what I'm thinking, and you can tell me preliminary whether or not I'm, just suffering from too much common sense.
Well, I think what we could have that as an agenda item next time to kind of do a reflection of
Sure.
where we are, how we got here, recommendations for next year, just to start to capture those so we can carve that out. That
Mhm.
works for you guys. So we'll get an update from Tom.
Yep.
Maybe we can even invite, again, the school if they have questions for us based on the motion we made. If they want to, I can extend that invite if they want to come and join us and ask questions if there's anything that they want clarity on based on what we discussed. And then we'll do a retrospective on kind of where we are at this point and, recommendations that maybe you guys have observed. This is your second go around. This is my third one after a break last year, so
Yeah, I'm interested in that kind of process improvement and I just wonder, it seems a bit out of place. We're still very much
Yeah.
in the throes of this
Yeah.
budget, so I don't, we should do it while it's still fresh in our minds, but I would respectfully request we kind of get through this or have a better clarity how we're getting through this before we Perfect.
I actually want to speak to the May agenda. I don't want to speak. I want to speak to the normal finance committee meeting in May. So I don't know if maybe that might be the appropriate time once
Yeah.
we've been through all of it.
I think
Yeah,
it's still
fine.
fresh.
I'm not in a hurry. I
Okay.
just, you asked about what are we gonna do at the next meeting, and that's been on my mind.
Okay,
So,
so we'll just keep it simple and say quick status update, and maybe Tom, if you need more time, just let us know if we need to cancel. Because again, I don't want to meet if it's just a
Yeah, I
10-minute
have
meeting.
2 other meetings that day. And
I might suggest if you're willing to, I think we would use that extra time wisely and be in a position to be very specific. And I think that would give the school certainly additional time, hopefully enough time to be equally thoughtful and be prepared to be very clear.
Okay, so that means our next meeting would be on, wouldn't be until May 3rd.
You need to have recommendations wrapped up by,
May, I have May 9th
right?
would be that's our official finance committee meeting where we could finalize recommendations before.
It's certainly possible that on May 3rd, you'll have what you need. But if
We
you
may.
don't, there's time for another meeting before the 9th.
So May 1st, you have the joint workshop with the school on the proposed budget.
You keep saying May 3rd.
May 1st,
3rd's Friday.
there's a Friday, yeah, May 1st is the joint.
And then May 2nd is the school board, Board of Education meeting night.
So I'm looking, I wish we had more time. Or like, I wish we had one more week in here. So I would say maybe we plan to have the meeting next week.
Okay.
Because again, I would like to not meet on May 3rd if we don't need to, if the,
I'm not here.
okay,
All right, let's do it. We'll do our best to.
all right. So we'll just keep it on the books and see where we can get. And I can reach out to Carolyn and let her know.
Are you going to deliver the news in terms of the goal?
I will.
I'll talk to Kate as well.
Okay.
We do have a resident online who'd like to make public comment.
Yep.
I got it. Marvin, you're free to speak if you'd like.
Yes, thanks. I always check. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
I appreciate it. Karen, Don, John, Norm, Liam, and Tom. I don't think I missed anybody. And I'm going to beat the drum as I usually do in a certain way regarding fund balance. And Don, this is not dire, nor do I think the earth is ending. And I understood your conversation perfectly. I do want to, and I think I understand the reasons and that you're well within the guidelines of the town. And they make sense, the reasons. I do want to say, though, that I didn't hear anything related to what helps strongly maintain the bond rating that I understand is not at risk, and that is Scarborough's growth trajectory. And I think it is because of Scarborough's growth trajectory that the bond rating agencies and the town does not risk a downgrade. And therefore, I realize it's way oversimplified mathematics to say that for every depletion of the fund balance, you are leaning a little more heavily on maintaining your growth trajectory, or the town's. But I do think it's fair to say that there's some correlation. And therefore, I would point to the town's very clearly stated desire to tap the brakes on growth as being a caution to the idea of depleting the fund balance. Thanks so much, and thanks for your work.
Thank you, Marvin. You have 30 seconds.
I just want to say, Marvin, I appreciate your comments. And I think that we really are going to need to have, I've been saying this for a while, a conversation about growth in relationship to taxation, because they go hand in hand. And so if we had no growth this year, it's correct to say that we would have had a 5% net budget increase and 5% tax increase. before we were doing anything about it. And so I'm not arguing with Marvin's comments. I'm just saying that the interaction between those two elements and getting some clarity about what the effect of growth is likely to be, what the effect of the growth ordinance is, all of those kinds of things, I think is necessary because we need to be responsive in a more proactive way.
And I agree with you. And
Thank you.
I also think it's important, like when it comes to our bond assessors, there's really like 6 different indicators that they're looking at. Another one is debt, and they want to make sure that we're healthy taking out debt. So again, I think it's all about balance between all of those. And, you know, I think we still are letting our growth management ordinance work its way out. Part of the issue we're experiencing this year is a clear turn down in permitting. So the impact of that is having less revenues than we have historically because of those permits that would have come out. So there is also a downside of slowing down growth, is that it's going to hurt our revenue side. It'll hurt excise taxes. But to Marvin's point, it's a good point. Like there is a growth element that we have to lean on to kind of maintain our overall fund balance. But that growth isn't just new growth, it's organic growth or inorganic growth that may occur, again, because of our values going up and everything. So again, I think that's also part of what they look at. It's not just net new growth, it's our overall value, correct? Like that's the metric.
Yeah, and we will be getting ready to do another bond issue just kind of on a regular cycle, and I would invite any or all of you to be part of those rating calls. I think they're very enlightening to understand what is of interest to the analysts. And they do publish, John's right, we can provide you what are the criteria the different rating houses value higher or highest.
Yeah.
And our policy says that we'll have an optimal bond rating. Doesn't go any further than that about what optimal is. And before we got into this whole budget process, we were starting to talk about reviewing our financial policy. And that's why it came up for me, was to say, well, one thing we ought to do is say what we mean by optimal, because that will help us address legit questions about how does the fund balance affect optimization.
More to come for that after we get past budget. So with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Karen, does Karen
Oh,
just?
sorry.
You're not leaving.
Nope.
The Parks and Conservation Land Board, as you know, wants to go on the ballot for November to refund the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund. They actually got a grant to conduct a survey. The survey is going out. They're getting the results of that survey on May 9th. We invited them to our May 9th meeting to discuss what we think the actual ask should be for the reserve fund. So first of all, do we have room for them on the May agenda? Can we even meet when they are getting the results from their expert that day? So we would not have materials and a recommendation from them until that exact day. I don't know if that's palatable, if people are okay with that. And then I think just generally, as I'm somewhat new to the process, where if they do want to be on the November ballot, you know, can we push them to June? And then, because I know we had at one point talked about doing a workshop with the council as well. So we would meet with finance, have a workshop. So I think I would really like to provide some direction to them if they're going to be coming in May on the day of everything getting to them, or if we can push them to June.
What I can say is this has been discussed at least twice with leadership. Council leadership knows it's coming. I think, I don't want to speak for them, but it's pretty clear they support the notion of it going in November. They are wondering what the right amount is. And so I know we've reserved time for a July workshop for the full council.
Okay.
The decision for matters to go to the ballot need to be decided by the end of July, early August at the latest. So that timing works.
So
So
I
I
think the
think we
question
have
is,
June.
can we tell them June?
I'll put them on the June meeting
Perfect. Thank you.
for finance.
That's helpful.
And then I'll make sure the council has reserved time as a group to receive that input from Parks and Conservation Land Board, perhaps this committee, if you have a recommendation, will all be a nice lead in to the council's workshop.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yep.
Was that the only question you had, Counselor Shoup?
For now.
I will just mention, staff member asked me, and I think John, you'll recall this. I think Sustainability Committee had a proposal that would direct a certain percentage of fees
The reserve account.
to reserve account. And I advise that the committee is preoccupied with budget, and that's a priority, but it's on our work plan.
Mhm.
So I just wanted you to be aware that they've inquired. Rick Miking may reach out to one or
We could,
all of us.
if we're freeing up time on the 9th by moving the land bond, we could probably tentatively plan for them to come on the May 9th regular meeting. Because I'm just looking at the list right now and we don't have anything. It really just depends on where we are from do we need that time to finalize budget
We might,
recommendations?
we might need that, that's the
Yeah.
final meeting before second reading.
Okay. Maybe we have both conversations on June.
I think you'd be fine with June. They just want to make sure has it on your agenda and it's not being lost.
I'm putting it on our June slot.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, so,
All-
Second.
All those in favor?
yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.